You're recording this one, right? Moish, does the 7:30 million offer a Vecker service? I heard there's Tikkun tomorrow. I'll be here tomorrow. And since Yossi is back, we're going to start learning Tanya again, right?
That's right.
You get to see all my YouTube channels. Baruch Hashem. It's only football and Seinfeld.
Okay.
All right.
Zog the Heilige Gemara. B'Mekdoshin Eina came. But yesterday we discussed Rav, who said on our Mishnah says that by a carbon Pesach, if there is no basar, you cannot make a zrika. Even if there's chaylev, but if there's no basar, you can't make a zrika because the main thing about a carbon Pesach is the achilas basar. Taf ayin tesam at aleph. Zog the Gemara. Oh, I don't even need this. So Zog the Gemara. Rav said that bidi eved, if you made a zrika, the carbon will be kosher, and you don't bring a Pesach sheni. Oy bazoi, the Gemara wanted to know where did Rav get it from. So one in the first part, the Gemara said Rav holds like Rab Nosson. Rav's learning the Mishnah like Rab Nosson, who holds that eating the carbon Pesach is not ma'akiv. In the second shot, it gave us a little bit of a chazara because it reminded us that Rabbi Yeshua said that if you make this, even though main basar ain't dam, but if you make this rika anyway, b'di eved, it's hortza. Now the Mishnah turns away from carbon Pesach and looks at the other karbanos that are not mainly lachila, and therefore, if there's either a kazayis of anything that you have to be makram on the mizbeach available, so achila, if there's a kazayis of achilas mizbeach available, you can spritz the dam. Or if there's a kazayis of achilas adam, you can also spritz the dam. Either one will validate the zrika of the dam on the mizbeach. So Zok the Gemara, masnisen mani Rabbi Shudi. Our Mishnah that says that either chaylev or basar will qualify zrikas adam would follow the shita of Rabbi Shua. The Tanya Rabbi Shua Eimer, kol hazvachim shebetoira. All of the karbonos in the Torah, shenishtayir mehen kazayis basar oy kazayis chaylev. If there's either a kazayis basar or a kazayis of chaylev, zoyek es adam. You're able to spritz the blood. What about if it's kechatzi zayis basar u kechatzi zayis chaylev? If there's only a half a zayis of each, then ein zoyek es adam. And the reason why you're not zoyek es adam, Rashi tells us that the achilas adam, the achilas mizbeach loy mitztarfen. The achilas adam, the part that the people eat, which is basar, and the part that the mizbeach eats is not mitzaref. So you either have to have a full achila of a mizbeach for the mizbeach or a full achila for the adam. But half and half doesn't count because if I share a half a kazayis with you, I'm not eating kazayis, you're not eating kazayis. You have to have a full achila, have a kazayis. But by oila, they do combine. Afilu kechatzi zayis basar, kechatzi zayis chalev, zoyek es adam. There it works. If they shakula kalo, because there by an oila, even the basar is called achilas mizbeach. Uva mincha, but by a carbon mincha, afapi shakula kayemes, even though the whole mincha is still intact, lo yizroik, you can't spritz the blood, which makes no sense because last I checked, there is no dam to spritz by a mincha. So, Frank the Gemara, mincha maya vidita. What does a mincha have to do with zrikas dam? Amar Papa minchas nesachim. We're talking about minchas nesachim. So I have a carbon. Let's say I brought a carbon oila, and whenever you bring a carbon, you have to bring an accompanying mincha. And let's say all of the basar and all of the chaylev got destroyed. So normally I wouldn't be able to make zrikas adam. But what if the mincha is still intact? So maybe the fact there's still a mincha intact would also allow me to make a zrika of the dam of the carbon. And on that, the Gemara says, since this minchas nasachim is sort of connected to the carbon, it's coming as an accessory to the carbon. We consider it like the guf azevach, and since it's still intact, you could still make a zrika. Kamash malon, that you need to have meat remaining in order to make the zrika, and the fact that there's a mincha remaining does not help to validate the zrika. Fact Gemara chaylev midalan. How do you know? It says, how does Rabbi Yeshua know that you have to have basar, otherwise you can't spritz the blood? We learned a couple of days ago, because it says, Vasisa oileisecha, habasar vadam. So you see, it's basar that's needed to validate this rika. Where do you see that even if there's chaylev remaining, that also validates this rika? Where would you know that from? We need a pasuk for that. So Zok Gemara, there's a pasuk as follows, and I'm going to read the whole pasuk inside. It says in the pasuk, "V'zarak hakoyin es adam al hamizbeach." The koyin spritzes the dam. So you see, this is talking about zrika, Pesach Hayamoid, and then it says v'hikter hachelev l'reich nechoich l'Hashem. So you see that through the akravas hachelev, you're allowed to make this rika. Zok Gemara. The pasuk says, "Victor achelev l'reich nechoich l'Hashem." Chelev afal pi shein basar. You can make a zrika if there's chelev, even though there is no basar. Therefore, chelev itself validates the zrika. So ashkechan chelev. I have a pasuk that says if you have chelev remaining. But what about if you have yoseres hakaved, which is the diaphragm, or shtei kloish, or the kidneys? Meaning it's not basar, but it's not chelev. It's other parts that you're makriv on the mizbeach. How do I know that those parts? Where does the Torah show you that those parts also validate this rika? Fact Gemara, minalon. Who said? I'm sorry. Ashkan chaylev. It says akavid ushtei aklosh minalon kama. Fact Gemara, heichan amrinin dezakinan. You're asking me, how do I know that chaylev and that yoseres akavid and shtei aklosh validate this rika? Whoever told you that they validate this rika? Our Bryce is only discussing the chaylev. So you're looking for a makor that the kavod and shtei kloyos validate this rika. No one ever told you that it does. So the Gemara, he was medayik from the brisa. Midikatani uva mincha aval b'shakula kayamas lo yizraik, from the fact that the Tana said only the mincha won't validate. Vice the is something that's in the gufa carbon would validate. Mincha hu deloy aval yiseres hakavod u'shtei kloyos shaper dami. Since it's only the mincha that won't validate, that indicates that anything that's meat or that's part of the carbon itself would validate, which would include the Yaseres HaKavod and the Shtei Kloyos. So that's the Tana. How does the Tana see that in the pasuk? Nolan. So Rabbi Yochanan said his own chiddush. Amar Kra l'reich nichayach. At the end of the pasuk, after it says v'hikter hachelev, it says v'hikter hachelev l'reich nichayach l'Hashem. L'reich nichayach tells you that kol sha'ata mala l'reich nichayach, any part of the carbon that you put on the mizbeach to create a reich nichayach will be adequate to validate the dam. The itzrich lemichtav chelev, you still need two words in the pasuk. You need the word chelev, v'itzrich lemichtav l'reich nichayach, because you might argue, once I know l'reich nichayach, that anything that's a reich nichayach validates the dam, validates the zrika, why does the Torah have to speak out chelev at all? So Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because of a chabana chelev, if the pasuk only said chelev, hava min a chelev in yoseres hakaved u'shtei hakloyos loy, I would have thought only the chelev, but not these organs. Because of Rachman l'reich nechoyach, that's why the pasuk says l'reich nechoyach to include not only chelev but even these organs. But because of Rachman l'reich nechoyach, if the pasuk only said l'reich nechoyach, which is highly inclusive, hava mina kol ha'ilon l'reich nechoyach v'afilu mincha. Then I would have thought that the Torah says any part of the carbon, anything connected to the carbon that creates a reich nechoyach would also validate the dam, and then even the mincha as well, which the Tanakh says does not work. That's why it says chelev to tell us only meat type of reich nechoyachs validate the dam. However, the mincha will not. Zok the Hedel Gemar weiter. Now we're going to get into really geschmacke Talmudic logic type of sugyas. Nitma kahal. What if the entire Jewish population became tamei, like it is today? Oyrubai, or most of Klal Yisrael became tamei. Or if all the Kahanim were Tameim, which means it's inevitable that the Korban Pesach will become Tamei, because the Kahanim are a very integral part of the Korban. Even if the Yisraelim are Torah, the Allah is Yasu B'Tumah. You can make it B'Tumah. You can make the Korban Pesach B'Tumah. So Rashi points out, this is fascinating, because if all of the Kahanim are Tamei, and a miut of Klal Yisrael is tamei, but most of Klal Yisrael is tar. Not only, so what is the problem if the Kahanim are tamei? The problem if the Kahanim are tamei is that they're going to end up being metame the carbon. Now, Pesach Sheni is for individuals that were Tamei. If Roiv Klal Yisrael is Tamei, then there's something called Tumah Hutra B'Tzivar or Tumah D'chuya. But if only individuals are Tamei, then they have to wait until Pesach Sheni. So let's just analyze what we have over here. If the whole tzibur is tahar, maybe there's a couple of individuals that are tamei, but the kohanim are all tamei, or the kalim are tamei, we're going to soon see. Then you make the carbon betuma, which means even those individuals that are tamei begufan, they can also participate. They don't have to wait till Pesach Sheni, because we say yasu betuma. So not only the people who are tar can participate, because think about it, the Yisraelim, they have no impact. If I'm tar, but everything else is tamei, I still remain tar, because I'm not touching the carbon, I'm not touching the kaihanim, so I remain tar. But Rashi tells us that even people who are personally tamei, they're also able to participate in this carbon Pesach. Nitma miyut hakal. What if only a miyut of the kal were tamei? So then hatahirin oisin esarishain. Exactly what Akiva brought up. That the tahirin, they'll bring their Pesach by Pesach Rishon, of course, b'tahira, the way it's supposed to be done. But tamein, and those individuals who are tamei, oisin is sheni, they get pushed off to Pesach Sheni. Tanraban, hareisho Yisrael tamein v'kaihanim uchleisharis tahirin. The tzibur was tamei. That's right. Even the individual tameim would participate in a case where it's all tamei anyway. In other words, if the kaihanim are tamei, yasu b'tamei in the Mishnah is talking about the oisha hayu akaihanim tameim. Even if the kaihanim and tameim and everybody else is tahar, you still bring the carbon b'tuma, and even the individuals who are tamei can participate in the Pesach Rishon.
So when the kohanim are tamei, it's not a numeric roiv anymore.
Correct. Because if the kohanim are tamei, that's matam everything, because they're very integral. Right, they're going to be touching everything.
So if, let's say, there's 4 kohanim who are tamei, so you feed them, do they have to wait for Pesach Sheni?
No. If the kohanim are tamei,
kohen is an exception to the rule. Kohen are unclassified.
Yeah, once the kohanim are tamei, that's called already a carbon that's been brought b'tuma, and now everybody has a carte blanche. It's interesting you bring that up, because if you think about it, just because the kohanim are tamei, no, the kohanim are tamei, it's agreed. It's impossible. They can't do zrika, they can't handle anything. It's going to come tamei. We're going to discuss soon if only all the chalifs. What if all the chalifs of Klal Yisrael are tamei? What happens then? So let's discuss that. Tanur Harejo Yisrael tameim, the kaihanim uchleisharis tahirim. Imagine if all the Yisrael were tamei, but the kaihanim and the kleisharis were tar. Oy show Yisrael tarin, or if all of Klal Yisrael was tar, the kaihanim uchleisharis tameim, and the kaihanim and the kleisharis are tamei. Afilu Yisrael the kaihanim tahirim. What if everybody is tar, but uchleisharis tameim? Only all the chalifs are tamei. So now there's no way to shech these karbanos without making them tamei. The Allah is yasu b'tumah. Then everybody could be tamei and make it, because she'ain carbon tzibur chaluk. You can't split it up, which means Rashi tells us haba b'tumah chaluk me'achar shekarvan ruban. I'm sorry, haba b'tumah me'achar shekarvan ruban ba b'tumah. Since most of this carbon is going to be brought b'tumah, afayachad oisa b'tumah. So therefore, even if roiv of the yidin are tamei, it allows everybody to do it b'tumah, because you don't split up. You don't say those who are tar do it b'tahira and those who are tamei do it b'tumah. Rather, once we have this heter of tumah heter b'tzibur, everybody could do it b'tumah. Amar b'chista, zakar b'chista, that's not across the board. Loishanu eloshanitma hasakin b'tamei meis. This would only apply if the sakin touched a tamei meis. So let's think about it. A mace is an avi avois hatamah. One who touches a mace becomes an avatuma. If you touch a sakin and you're an avatuma, the sakin also becomes an avatuma. Because we learned that when it comes to things that are metal, when we're talking about tumah that originated from a mace, the metal takes on the same level of tumah as the thing that was metameit. The Rachmana Amar b'chalal cherev, and we learn from there, cherev hareu k'chalal. Whenever you have a sword or any other piece of metal that touches something that's tumah originated from a mace, the metal takes on the same level of tumah of that it was infected from. The kamatama legavra, and therefore, if you have a knife, if you have a sakin, a chalaf, that's a rishon, that's a avatuma, and you touch it, that means you'll become a rishon latuma, because if the sakin that you touch is an av, you become a rishon. So therefore, mitamin legavra. and therefore the meikar ki misavid b'tumas aguf, the karish ka misavid. This kohen or this Yisrael, whoever is doing the shechita, the moment he touches the knife, he becomes a rishon l'tumah. So now he's doing a voida, he's doing a shechita, and he himself is a tameh, he's a rishon l'tumah. And the halacha is, if you go into the azara b'tumah, you're chayiv karis. So if we have a situation where it's impossible to do this avodah without being tameh, and you'll be chayiv karis, then everybody can do it b'tumah. Aval nitma hasakin b'tumah sheretz. What if the sakin became tumah b'tumah sheretz? So let's figure this out. The sheretz is an av. It makes the sakin into a rishon, because unlike if the tumah originated from a mace, if the tumah originated from a sheretz, then it always goes one level down. So the knife, the chalif that touched the sheretz became a rishon l'tumah. What can a rishon l'tumah make tameh? A rishon l'tumah cannot make a person tameh, because a person cannot become a sheni. Only a Michael or a Mishta could become Tamei Sheni. So now this knife, that's a Rishon L'Tumah, could only make food Tamei, it can't make a person Tamei. The Basar Hu D'Metamele, the Gavrloi Metamele, it could make the animal Tamei, the meat Tamei, but it cannot make the Shoichet Tamei. So therefore, in such a case, Tahirin of it. Only people that are Tahar are allowed to be involved in the carbon, even though the carbon is going to end up being Tamei. But we don't allow people that are tamei to be involved in this carbon, only people that are tahar. But tamei loyovit, we will not allow people who are tamei themselves be involved in the carbon pesach. Why? Because there's different levels. Mutav yoichel b'tumas basar balav. We're only going to be matter, since that's the only thing that's proliferated, that everybody's suffering from, is tumas basar, because all of the chalas are tamei. That will give in upon them. That will let you do b'tzibur. But we're not going to allow a much greater level of iser. We're not going to open it up to everybody who's tamei themselves, shehu b'karis, because that is an iser karis. So you see, even though we're being mater, when tumah was proliferated, we only allow a certain level of tumah, the level of tumah that's there. So if the level of tumah that we're infected with is only a tumah that makes the carbon tamei, then that's all we're going to allow. We will not allow people who are tamei to participate in this carbon. But if the level of tumah that has proliferated was a tumah that the people themselves become tamei, because the knife makes anybody who touches it tamei, once we've opened up that level of tumas aguf, then we open up tumas aguf for everybody. Which means alma must be that kasavar Reb Chisda tumah dechuya hibetzibur. Reb Chisda must hold tumah dechuya hibetzibur. Because the difference between hutra b'tzibur and the chuy b'tzibur is, hutra means we've totally eliminated the iser, everything's mutar lechatchila. The chuy means we're very begrudgingly allowing you to do it b'tzibur. And therefore we're going to mitigate how much tumah we're going to allow, and we still try to keep it to a minimum. So from the fact that Reb Chisda says that just because there's tumas habasar, we still don't open it up to tumas aguf, that shows Reb Chisda is still trying to limit the tumah. So that clearly shows that he holds tumah dechuya hibetzibur and not hutra b'tzibur. The Chenemar Rabbi Yitzchak agreed to Reb Chisda that tumah dechuya hibetzibur. The Rava says no. Afilu tamei nami yavdi. Once the basar becomes tamei, then anybody who's tamei beguf, even though they already take it up to a level of a chiv karis, they'll also be able to participate in the carbon. My timer. The Chesiv says in the basar, "Va'basar asher yiga b'chal tamei lo yeyachel." So the first half of the pasuk is discussing when the basar becomes tamei. The second half of the pasuk says, "Basar kol toil yerchal basar." Only one who's tar may eat the meat. So we darshan kol heicha de loy karinin bei via basar asher yiga b'chal tamei lo yachel. As long as there's no ister tuma on the meat, in other words, the meat itself is tahar, then loy karinin bei via basar kol tar yerchal basar. Then we also have the prohibition of someone tamei from eating the meat or touching the meat. But once the basar is already tamei, therefore we no longer have the prohibition of a basar, the iser for someone who's tamei to touch this meat is removed. So what Rav is saying is the only type of meat that you have a iser karis to touch or to eat when you're tamei is only meat that's tahar. But if the meat's tamei anyway, there's no longer a chi of karis if you eat it. It's not a mitzvah, but there's no longer a chiv kares. And therefore, Rava says, once the basar alone is tamei, since there's no distinction anymore, once it's tamei, then everybody would be allowed to participate in this carbon pesach, even if they themselves were tamei. Zok Gemara, Itmar. So now we're going to get into complicated situations. We know if roiv of Klal Yisrael are tamei, we know that everybody could bring the carbon batuma by Pesach Rishon. If a mir of Klal Yisrael are tamei, then there's no heter to bring this carbon batuma. You have to bring it b'tahira, and those individuals that are tamei will have to wait to Pesach Sheni to bring it. Now, before we go weiter, I want to bring up an interesting point. The interesting point is the Gemara seems to be telling us that if the knife is tamei, it's inevitable that the kohen or the Yisrael, whoever shechting it, will become tamei. Because the Mishnah says if the knife became tamei by touching a tamei mace, then whoever shechts with this knife is going to become tamei, and if he's going to become tamei, there's an Isser Karis for him to enter the Azara. Tosfos asks a very simple question. Who said, what if I stand outside the Azara and I use a long knife? So I could technically shecht, I'm tamei, I become tamei from the knife, but the animal, but I'm not over any chiv kares. So that's question number one, Tosfos asks. Question number two is, who's that I have to grab the knife directly with my hand and become tamei from it? Let me grab some pieces of wood that are pshuta kliyet, that are not makabel tumah, and grab it with wood. It's like if you can't wash, you eat the bread in a napkin. So grab it with a napkin with something that's not makabel tumah, and then you won't even come tamei. So you see, you could bring the carbon pesach even though the knife is tamei. So Tosfos says that's a really great idea. Try doing that and shechting 2 million carbonas in the span of 4 hours. It ain't going to happen. So Tosfos, even though, if it was one carbon, you could do it that way, but with the mass production that has to happen in the preparation of the carbon pesach, it would be impossible to pull it off. Kohanim is reasoning, but they're not necessarily polymorphous. Now the Gemara says weiter. Till now we were dealing with roiv. If roiv is a loy, roiv is a loy. Idmar fragt Gemara, what if it was 50-50? Hareisho Yisrael mechza toyin umechza tmein. What would Allah be? So Mara would say, you know what? Come back when that happens. Until then, we'll worry about it. But the Gemara declares what's going to be? What's going to be if it's exactly 50-50? That's right. Do another election. Bring more ballots. If it's exactly 50-50, just stuff more ballots. Rav says, Mechza Mechza Karayv. Mechza and Mechza has a din of a rayv. And the Gemara is going to explain how that manifests itself. Rav Kana Omer Mechza Mechza Ein Karayv. Rav Omer Mechza Mechza Karayv. And therefore, Halalu Oisin La'atzman, those who are tahar will be makriv the carbon pesach on their own b'tahira. Halalu, and the 50% of Klal Yisrael that are tamei, Oisin La'atzman, they make their own carbon pesach b'tumah. And Rashi explains the tahirim cannot be makriv the carbon pesach b'tumah, because if we consider the tahirim as roiv, then if roiv of the Klal Yisrael are tahar, there is no heter to do it b'tumah. So therefore, they have to bring the carbon b'tahira. And when you look at the other half of the people that are tamei, you treat them like a roiv as well, and they're allowed to bring it b'tumah. And since they're allowed to bring it b'tumah, you can't tell them wait till Pesach Sheni, because we know that if roiv Klal Yisrael is tamei, they're not allowed to wait till Pesach Sheni. They have to bring it by Pesach Rishon. So since both halves, the half that are Torah have to bring it today, and the half that are tamei have to bring it today, you let them both bring it today, but you separate the tamei from the Torah. That was Rav's opinion. Rav Kahana Amar, Mechza Mechza Ein Karayv. You don't treat Mechza Mechza like a rayv. And therefore, Tahirin, Oisin Es Harishain, Tahirin bring Pesach Rishon. And Rashi explains, Mimanavshech. If they're the rayv, for sure they have to bring it on Erev Pesach Rishon. And if they're the miyat, then anyway, everybody brings it today. So regardless, they have to bring the carbon for Pesach Rishon. But U'Tmein, since they might not be the rayv, Oisin Es Hasheni, we push them off to Pesach Sheni. That's one version of what Rav Kahana said. Ikad Amri, there was another version of what Rav Kahana said. Omer Rav Kahana, Mechza Mechza Ein Karayv. 50-50 is not like rayv, and therefore Tahirin Oisin Es Harishain. The Tahirin will will do Pesach Rishon, just like in the first Lashon. Utemein, and the Temein, let me see how I can get to the next daf. Utemein, let's have a look-see. Utemein, why can't I figure out how to get to the next daf? Oh, I know how to do it. I got to go all the way to the top. No, it's not there. Oh, next page over here. It's right there. Utemein, and the Temein, Ein Oisin Lo Yesa Rishon V'Lo Yesa Sheni. They can't bring a korban Pesach at all. Why? But Rishon Layavdi, they can't bring Pesach Rishon till they have a ruba. They're 50%, they're not considered roiv, and therefore there's no heter to bring the korban b'tumah on Pesach Rishon. But B'Sheni Layavdi, they can't bring it Pesach Sheni either till they have a minuta. They're not a meat either. And we know you only have a chiyuv to bring a korban Pesach by Pesach Sheni if you're a miyut. If you're a miyut of Klal Yisrael, you're an individual and you're tamei and you can't bring the korban Pesach Rishon, then you become mechuyev in Pesach Sheni. But you're not a miyut. So therefore, you're nishtahin and nishtaher, you kerech mikan and mikan, you don't bring a korban Pesach at all. Zok Gemara. Tanan we learned, so let's just review the three options we have. Rav learns are both roiv, which means everybody brings the korban on Pesach Rishon, the Tamein and the Tahirin, except we segregate them. The Tahirin bring it separately with the Tahira, and the Tamein bring it separately with Tumah. Rav Kahana in his first lashon holds that the Tahirin bring it on Pesach Rishon, and the Tamein bring it on Erev Pesach Sheni. And Rav Kahana in his second lashon holds that the Tahirin bring it by Pesach Rishon, and the Tameim don't bring the korban at all. Zok the Gemara, Tanan, Nitma Kahal Ayruboy. Let's look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says if all of Klal Yisrael became Tamei, or if most of Klal Yisrael became Tamei, Oishu Yikahanim Tamein, Vakal Tahirin Yasa B'tumah. But let's make a dik. Our Mishnah says Dafka B'roiv. Do you say Yasa B'tumah? Rubai Hu Avdi B'tumah. Aval Palga. If it was 50-50, Loy Avdi B'rishon. They wouldn't bring the korban Pesach by the first Erev Pesach. So Kashal Rav. This is a contradiction to Rav, because Rav says that everybody does bring the korban Pesach by Pesach Rishon. Amalach Rav, Zok Rav, Ruba Avdi, Kula B'tumah. If roiv of Klal Yisrael are tamei, then everybody could bring the korban, even B'tumah. Nobody has to isolate. Everybody could become tamei, could allow themselves to become tamei, and they can all bring the korban B'tumah. And you're medayik from the Mishnah. Dafka roiv could do that. But 50-50 would not be able to do that. What would be the halacha by 50-50? Halalu oisin la'atzman. The Tahirin have to make their korban b'tahira, segregated from the Tamein. Halalu oisin la'atzman. And the Tamein would bring their korban on Erev Pesach Rishon, of course, but they do it segregated b'tumah. So therefore, the dik of the Mishnah makes sense. The Mishnah says this halacha applies dafka by roiv, because dafka by roiv can everybody do it b'tumah. But if it's 50-50, the halacha will be different, where although everyone still brings the korban Pesach, the Tamein bring it b'tumah, but the Tahirin have to bring it b'tahira. And hakanami mistavra. It's logical, besides of Rav's halacha, it's logical anyway to understand our Mishnah that way, because otherwise you'd have a stira from the Resha to the Seifa. The Katani Seifa nitma miyut hakal. If only a minority of the kahal became tamei, then oishin es harishon utmeim, oishin es hasheni, and we make a dik miyut hu avdi b'sheni. Only if there's a minority of Klal Yisrael that's tamei on the Erev Pesach does it trigger a chiyuv for them to bring the korban Pesach Sheni. Aval palga upalga, if it was 50-50, loy, then you would not bring the korban Pesach by Pesach Sheni. So what would they do? You'd have to say, the Avdi Berishon, they would bring the korban Pesach by the first Pesach, but it would be segregated. V'alalu oisin la'atzman, the Tahirin bring their korban separately. V'alalu oisin la'atzman, and the Tamein bring their korban separately. So this, our Mishnah, jives perfectly with Rav's approach. But then it's going to have a problem with Rav Kahana, because Rav Kahana tells us that in fact either they don't bring it at all, or they bring it by Pesach Sheni, and that would not stem with our Mishnah the way we're learning the Mishnah now. Amalech Rav Kahana, so Rav Kahana will have to answer our Mishnah as follows. The Sefer the Mishnah says, Nitbu miyat hakol, if a miyat of the oilam became tamei, tahir noisin es harishon, the people who are tar bring their korban Pesach, Erev Pesach Rishon, u'tamein oisin es hasheni, and those who are tamei, they bring Pesach Sheni. So we make a diak. Ha-palga upalga, if it's exactly 50-50, that wouldn't be the halacha. What would the halacha be? Tahirin Oisines Harishon. Those who are tar bring their korban Pesach by erev Pesach Rishon. Aval Tamein, those who are Tamei, Einin Oisin Loyas Harishon V'Loyas Hasheni. They don't bring the korban at all. That works very well according to the second lashon of Rav Kahana, that the half that are tamei are now unable to bring any korban at all. But in the first lashon of Rav Kahana, we said the tameim oishnas hasheni ma'ikala meimar. Clearly, there's a deek from the Mishnah. Dafka, if it's a miyah tahirin, do they make it by Pesach Sheni? But if it's 50-50, you don't bring it by Pesach Sheni. Yet Rav Kahana holds you do bring it by Pesach Sheni. Amalach Rav Kahana, hu adin dafidu palga nami tahirin. Don't make the deek from the Seifa, the dafka by a miyat of tahirin. Sorry, dafka by a miyat of tameyin. Are they pushed off to Pesach Sheni? But it was 50-50, they wouldn't bring it by Pesach Sheni. Don't read into the Mishnah that way. Says lav dafka. Why did it say miyut? If even by a case of 50-50, the Tameim bring it by Pesach Sheni, so that's what the Mishnah should have said. So Gemara, I did the Tana Reisha Rubai, since the Reisha used the word Roiv, and there it is Dafka, because only if Roiv Klal Yisrael is tar, only if Roiv Klal Yisrael is Tamei, does everybody bring it Patoma. Therefore, Tana Nami Seifa Miyutai. The Sefer used the word miyutai, but miyutai is really lav davka. Even 50-50 would have the same halacha that the tahirin bring the korban Pesach on erev Pesach, and the tamein bring it by erev Pesach Sheni. Beautiful. Tanya Kavase, the Rav. We have a brisa that supports Rav, and Tanya Kavase the Rav Kahana Katrei Lishni, and we have a brisa for each lashon of Rav Kahana to support them. So we think this is a very benign sugya, because we're just going to have a happy-go-lucky brisa that supports each one of the shitas. But what's going to get complicated is, how is each of these three shitas going to understand the brisa that supports the opposing shita? And that's where this gets a little bit complicated, but not too difficult. So let's have a look. Tanya Kavasa the Rav. Let's look at the brisa that supports Rav shita. Hoyu Yisrael mechza tarun and mechza tamein. What if it was exactly 50-50? So this is quite explicit, saying precisely what Rav said. Tanya Kalishna Kama to Rav Kahana. Now we're going to bring a ride to the first lashon of Rav Kahana, that the Tahirim bring it erev Pesach Rishon and the Tameim bring it Pesach Sheni. Haresha Hayu Yisrael Mechza Tahirim and Mechza Tameim. Tahirim Noisnes Harishon and Tameim Noisnes Hasheni. Again, pretty simple. And then Tanya Kalishna Basra, that the Tahirim bring it erev Pesach Rishon and the Tameim don't bring it at all. Tanya Kalishna Basra of Kahana, Haresha Yisrael Mechza Tahirim and Mechza Tameim. Tahirim Noisnes Harishon Utmein Ein Noisen Loyas Harishon Loyas Hasheni. So it's beautiful. Everybody has a raya. According to Rav, and the second lashon of Rav Kahana, who holds that you don't bring Pesach Sheni at all. The brisa that supported the lishna kama of Rav Kahana, how will Rav understand this brisa? According to Rav, if it was 50-50, they all bring it by Pesach Rishon. So how is Rav going to understand the brisa that says that the Tamein bring it by Pesach Sheni? So Gemara, we have a solution for that. Kigoyin shahoyu Yisrael mechzet tahirin umechzet Tamein. So if you add up all the Yidden in Klal Yisrael, you have exactly 50-50. But the problem is the noshim mashlimas l'Tamein. If you add up the men are really roiv tahirin. But if you add the women make it that it should be 50-50. So just for argument's sake, let's say out of 1,000 men, there were 600 Tahirin and 400 Tamein. But by the women, it was the opposite. It was 600 Tamein and 400 Tahirin. So if you aggregate everybody together, it's 50-50. But if you only look at the men, you really have Rav Tahar. The Kasover, and this brisa holds that Noshim Berishon Rishus. The first korban Pesach, women are not mechuyev in it. It's only Rishus. Kolshke is by Pesach Sheni. So basically, Noshim have no chiyuv to bring Pesach Rishon. So therefore, Dal Noshim etamin, if you removed the women from the census, then Vahavalu Tamein Miuta. Then the Tameim are the Miuta. Now the halach is umiyuta yitchulu Pesach Sheni, and we know that when Roiv Klal Yisrael is tar, and only individuals are tamei, those that are tar bring it by Pesach Rishon, and those that are tamei bring it by Pesach Sheni.
The eligible voters. That's what you're saying.
That's right.
Those who are eligible.
That's right. That's right. Umiyuta yitchulu Pesach Sheni, l'Rav. So that works out very good, Rav. Well, listen to Kamad Rav Kahana. I'm sorry. Let's period. The Rav uladish nakamad Rav Kahana, according to Rav and the first lashon of Rav Kahana, had Tanya tahirin oishin nisarishon utmein ein oishin loyas arishon v'loyas hasheni. So the brisa that supported the second lashon of Rav Kahana, how are you going to understand it according to Rav and according to the first lashon of Rav Kahana? Heichem ataris la Rav. How are you going to explain it? So Rav Mataritzla, Rav who learns that normally in this case, if it's 50-50, everyone brings the carbon by Pesach Rishon, how is he going to understand why here the Tmein don't bring the carbon at all? It's Kagoyin, show you Yisrael, Mechta Tmein, Mechta Taran. Once again, if you add everybody up, it's 50-50. But the Noshim, Oitvois ala Tahirin. But if you calculate the women are going to make it that there should be more Tahirin. So for Keret, if you calculate the males, it's 50-50. But if you calculate the women in the group, it's going to make it that there's more Tahirim. Because over, and this price holds, Noshim B'Rishon Chayva. Women have a chiyuv to bring Pesach Rishon. But if for some reason they're Tamei B'Derech Chayka, they cannot bring a Pesach Rishon, Uvisheni Rishus. They don't have a chiyuv to bring the Pesach Sheni. So therefore, B'Rishon Lo Yavdi, we're not going to be able to allow them to bring we're not going to allow the Tameim to bring the Pesach Rishon to have a miyot, because there's a miyot. Because if you calculate the women, there's more Tahirim than there are Tameim. So therefore, the Tameim are a miyot, umiyut lo yavdi b'rishon, and the miyot of Klal Yisrael cannot bring a carbon Pesach by the first Pesach. And there's a real miyot, because women are in the count, because women have a chiyuv to bring the carbon Pesach Rishon. So therefore, the Tameim will not be able to bring. Now, B'Sheni, Lo Yavdu, the reason why this group of Tameim will also not bring the Pesach Sheni is because when you talk about the Chiyuv of the Pesach Sheni, we have to calculate different people. Dal Mosheminayu. Now you cannot include the women in the count related to Pesach Sheni. Therefore, V'havalu Palga Upalga. So the guy with Pesach Sheni, it's exactly 50-50. Upalga Lo Yavdu B'Sheni. And Raf holds that if 50% of Klal Yisrael is Tamei, they don't bring Pesach Sheni. They have to bring Pesach Rishon. Unfortunately, we couldn't let them bring Pesach Rishon either, because for Pesach Rishon, they were in the miyut, because for Pesach Rishon, you do count the women. Rav Kahana, the Amar, Palga Nami of the B'Sheni, according to Rav Kahana, who holds that half could bring B'Sheni, so why can't they bring B'Sheni over here? How will he understand this brisa that says you can't bring by Pesach Sheni? So tomorrow, Matarikla, this is how he will explain it. To go and show Yisrael Mechza Tahirin Umechza Tmei. Klal Yisrael was exactly half and half, if you include the women. In order for them to be 50-50, it's only if you calculate the women. Without the women, there would be more people that are Tamei. The Kasavar and the Brisa holds, Noshim B'Rishon Chayva U'B'Sheni Rishos. Women by Pesach Rishon are Mechuyev in the carbon Pesach, but not Mechuyev in Pesach Sheni. So let's think. B'Rishon Lo Yavdi, these Tameim cannot bring the carbon Pesach by Erev Pesach Rishon. Tavalu Palga Upalga, it's 50-50, and according to Rav Kahana, by 50-50, Upalga B'Rishon Lo Yavdi. And therefore, the 50% of Tameim cannot bring the carbon Pesach by Pesach Rishon. And what about Pesach Sheni? The Sheni Nami Lo Yavdi, they're not able to bring a Pesach Sheni either. You know why? Because Dal Noshim Inayu, if you take the women away, Minat Tahirin, so now Havalu Tameim Ruba, then the Tameim are going to be Ruba, because it was only 50-50 because you calculated the women. But if you take the women out of the count, then the Tameim are Ruba. Ruba of the B'Sheni. And if the Tameim are Roiv, then they had to have brought up a Pesach Rishon. So therefore, they're cut out for both carbon Pesachs. And that's how everybody could understand everybody else's brisa, except the first brisa that was the right to Rav Kahana is going to have a problem with that. Well, Rav Kahana, according to Rav Kahana, the brisa that proved Rav's halacha, Hadatanya Reisha Yisrael Mechza Tayin Umechza Tamein Halalu Oisin La'atzman Halalu Oisin La'atzman Heichim Etaritzla. How is Rav Kahana going to explain that? Rav Kahana doesn't have any circumstance under which everyone could bring the Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach Rishon. Amalach Rav Kahana, you're right, Tanoi. According to Rav Kahana, he has to say that his shita is totally the machlokes tanoim. There is a Tana of this vast brisa that clearly holds like Rav that mechsa is karoiv, and therefore both the Tameim as well as the Tahirin will bring their carbon on Erev Pesach Rishon. But I hold Dr. Rav Kahana like the other Tanoim, and therefore the 50% of Tameim will either bring it by Pesach Sheni, according to his first lashon, or would not bring it at all, according to his second lashon. I guess we could stop here.
Half and half is what? Is like an optimist? Is the glass half full?
I mean, we wonder what's the crux of the machlokes if 50% should be right.
Yeah, how could you say it's right? It's not right.
Because maybe the vice president, if it's a 50-50 tie, the vice president will paskin. No, because the vice president could be like certain rabbanim. Oh, you're right. What about us? You're also right. So it's like the vice president will vote to either side because they can't decide. But I don't know. It's a good hara. What is the svara to say that mechza could be kareiv, and what's the svara to say it shouldn't be kareiv? So you say Rav was an optimist, and half is good, and Rav Kahana was a pessimist. So I don't mind saying that Rav was an optimist, but it's hard to say that Rav Kahana was a pessimist. So maybe Rav Kahana was a realist. Rav Kahana was a realist.
Is it a trend? We're saying, is it going on the way up or it's on the way down? It's not. It's as far as general. And does it apply to everything? If I know there's 10 pieces of kosher meat inside and 10 pieces